Montana Territory, August 1883, the first time he heard her voice, it was through a mess of laughter that made his stomach turn. "She talks like she swallowed a bell," one man jeered, leaning against the post outside the general store in Red Rock Ridge. "Maybe if she spoke English proper, we'd know what she's even trying to say," another added, loud enough to carry. She stood just off the porch, clutching a sack of flour to her chest, her cheeks red, not from the sun. Her bonnet shaded most of her face, but Hunter Wallace saw her jaw tighten. She did not look at them. She just turned, slow and stiff, and started walking down the dusty street like she could disappear into the prairie if she moved fast enough. Hunter stepped off the saloon porch without thinking. His boots hit the dirt hard. "Hey," he called after her, loud enough to stop her. "Wait." The men behind him quieted when he turned, his eyes cut sharp. "You boys mocking someone for how they talk," he said. "That what passes for fun now," one of them cleared his throat. "Just teasing, sounds like you were trying to feel taller by making someone else small." Hunter's voice was low, but it carried. "My mother had an accent, came from Alsace. You mocking her too?" They did not answer, just shuffled and muttered and went quiet when Hunter looked hard at them. When he turned back, the woman was still standing there, sack of flour hugged tight to her ribs, watching him like she was not sure what he was. "Sorry," he said, slower now. "You all right, miss?" "I am," she said. Her voice was soft, thick with something foreign, German, maybe, or Danish. "I do not need rescuing." "I did not say you did," Hunter said, and then, after a pause, "but I liked your voice. Sounds like home to me." Her lips parted just a little, like she had not expected that. Her arms were still drawn tight around the flower like a shield. He stepped closer, slow. "Name is Hunter Wallace. I've got a spread west of here near the river forks." She blinked once. "Sofie Traulsen." "That an accent from back east?" he asked. "Or farther?" "Farther," she said. "I was born in Schleswig, northern Germany." Hunter nodded once. "Bet that was a long road to get here." Her shoulders loosened just a little. "Yes, you got family out here?" "No," she looked off toward the low hills. "Not anymore." He had heard that tone before. It was the sound of someone who had buried more than one person on the way west. "You staying in town?" "I take work where I find it. Sewing, baking, I clean for the doctor sometimes." Hunter looked at the sack in her arms. "You walking all the way back with that?" "I can manage." He reached a hand toward it. "Let me help." Sofie hesitated, then slowly gave it over. "It is not far." They walked side by side down the street, the town quieting behind them. Hunter glanced at her now and then, careful not to push. She did not talk much, but she did not walk faster to get away from him either. Her place was a small lean-to behind the doctor's house, shaded by cottonwoods. When they reached it, she opened the door and stepped inside, then turned to take the flower from him. "Thank you," she said, "for speaking up." Hunter shrugged. "You should not have to explain why you sound the way you do. Hell, it makes things more interesting around here." That pulled a small smile from her. He tipped his hat. "Let me know if you ever need help with anything heavier than flour." She closed the door gently behind her. Hunter did not expect to see her again so soon, but 2 days later he found her in the alley behind the boarding house, kneeling beside a boy who looked barely 7. The child's lip was split, and he was holding his arm funny. Hunter dismounted and approached. "What happened?" Sofie looked up, startled. "He fell." "I did not fall," the boy muttered. "He pushed me." Sofie looked torn. "His name is Jakob. His younger sister, Johanna, is inside. They were left here. Their mother died on the train. Their father went south for work and never came back." Hunter's jaw tightened. "They've been staying with you?" "Yes, they sleep on the floor. It is not much," but he crouched beside the boy. "Jakob, you let me take a look." The boy stared at him, wary, but he nodded. Hunter checked the arm gently, careful. "Dislocated elbow, I think. I can take him to Doc Miller." Sofie nodded. "I will get Johanna." The little girl clung to her skirts as they walked to the doctor's, and when Jakob cried out as the bone was set, she did not look away. Afterward, they sat on the porch. The sun was dipping low, casting everything gold. "You planning on keeping them?" Hunter asked. "I do not know," she said. "I cannot afford much, but I cannot leave them." Hunter looked at her, the way her hand rested gently on Johanna's head. "You are doing more than most would." She gave a small shrug. "They need someone." "So do you," he said. She blinked. What? You need someone too, she shook her head, flustered. I am not asking for anything, he said. Just saying maybe we help each other. You bake, you sew, you clean. I have a ranch house that could use all three. Sofie looked down at her hands. What would you want in return? Company, he said. A voice that sounds like home. Her breath caught. He looked at her, sure and steady. You and the kids can come stay. I will build another room if I have to. You can leave any time you want, but if you stay. His voice gentled. You will not be alone anymore. She did not answer right away, but after a long moment she looked up at him with wet eyes and nodded. All right. Hunter stood and held out a hand. She took it, and something shifted, like the whole world had leaned just a little closer. The wagon creaked under the weight of the children's few belongings: 2 patched quilts, a wooden box of sewing notions, a tin pail, and a rag-stuffed doll with one button eye. Hunter led the team, reins loose in his gloved hands, while Sofie sat beside him. Johanna nestled between them, her head resting against her brother's arm. Jakob sat behind, legs dangling from the tailgate, silent but alert. They left Red Rock Ridge just after sunrise, the sky still blushed with the last of dawn. Dust rose behind them in a soft wake, and the prairie stretched wide, golden and whispering with dry grass. Hunter glanced sideways now and then, not speaking unless she did. Sofie broke the quiet first. How long have you lived out this way? 14 years, he said. My father brought us out from Missouri after the war, bought land near the confluence. My folks are buried there now. She nodded without looking at him. It must be a quiet place. He glanced toward the horizon. Real quiet. But I never minded that. His voice eased. Some men chase noise. I like knowing what I'll hear when I wake up. Johanna stirred, lifting her face. Will there be chickens? Hunter smiled at her. There's a dozen hens and 1 mean rooster. You'll have to keep an eye on your petticoat. The girl giggled, small and quick. Jakob leaned forward. Is it true there are snakes? Plenty, Hunter said, but none in the house. You'll be safe there. By midday, the cottonwoods thickened along the creek, and the first glimpse of the homestead came into view: a low, timber-framed house with a sod-roofed shed behind it. A split-rail fence circled the garden, and smoke curled from the chimney. A dog barked once from beneath the porch and then loped toward them, tail high. Sofie straightened. You live here alone, mostly, Hunter said. A neighbor rides through when I need an extra hand. But it's been just me since my brother took off for Idaho. She stepped down slowly once the wagon stopped, eyes scanning the porch, the barn, the hills beyond. It is very still, he nodded. No one passes by unless they mean to. Inside, the house was tidy but worn plain pine table, 2 ladder-back chairs, a bookshelf half filled with journals and ledgers, a rifle mounted above the hearth. A single iron bed stood in the far corner, neatly made. Sofie's gaze lingered there only a moment before she turned to the hearth. You heat with wood, I chop it myself. There's a cord stacked behind the shed. She touched the mantel, fingers brushing the edge of a carved wooden bowl. Did your mother make this, my sister? He said. She was younger than me, died the winter before last. Sofie's hand stilled. He spoke again, quieter. She would have liked you. She did not respond to that. Instead, she crossed to the small kitchen space and opened the cupboard with care. There is flour, salt, beans. You are short on lard. I'll ride to town next week. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. I will need a table for sewing. I can build one, he said. Give me 2 days. That night they ate boiled beans with cornmeal biscuits she had baked in the stove's firebox. Jakob and Johanna curled together on a mattress made up near the hearth, their hands clasped in sleep. Sofie sat near the window, mending a worn hem by lamplight. Hunter watched her from the doorway, arms crossed loosely over his chest. You always sew this late. She didn't look up. I sleep better when my hands are busy. Then you must have had many long nights. She tied off the thread. I did. He stepped inside, voice quiet. You ever think about going back east? There is nothing east of here for me, she said, just the ocean. And graves. He sat down across from her, resting his arms on the table. You don't talk like someone who's used to staying put. I learned not to unpack too much, she said. It makes leaving harder. Hunter was silent for a moment, the lamp flickering between them. Then he said, "Well, I don't plan on leaving, and I built this place to last." She looked up then, not guarded, just tired. "It is strange to be offered a place to stay without having to earn it with my back." "You already have," he said. "You just don't know it yet." She folded the mended skirt and set it aside. "I will make bread in the morning. I'll show Jakob where the chickens roost. He can gather eggs." She stood and moved past him toward the children. When she knelt to pull a quilt higher over Johanna's shoulder, Hunter saw her pause, fingers resting on the girl's hair. Then she rose and crossed the room again. He offered her the bed without a word, laid a blanket for himself by the hearth, and banked the fire low. She stood a long moment, hand resting on the bedpost. "I will not be a burden," she said. "You're not. And I will not be someone's charity. You're not that either." She nodded once, then stepped behind the curtain he had hung earlier for privacy. The soft rustle of her setting down her shawl was the last sound before silence deepened. Hunter lay on the floor, the fire casting dim light across the beams overhead. He listened to the wind outside, the breath of children sleeping, and the quiet shift of Sofie settling in. It had been a long time since the house held more than just him. He closed his eyes and let the stillness settle into something different than loneliness. Something better. Something beginning. The first frost came early. It crept in overnight, laying a fine silver skin over the pumpkin vines and turning the pasture grasses brittle underfoot. Sofie stood at the edge of the garden just after sunrise, apron full of turnips and potatoes, her breath curling in the cold as she watched Hunter repair the west fence line beyond the barn. Jakob had taken to the land quickly. He'd fashioned a sling for his elbow out of an old feed sack and still managed to help Hunter carry nails and hold rails steady. Johanna followed Sofie from root cellar to chicken coop, asking quiet questions, always watching. Inside, the bread had risen high in the tin pans. The scent of it lingered through the house, warm and steady. Sofie set the loaves near the hearth to cool and began stitching a new bodice from scraps she'd bartered for in town. She didn't look up when Hunter entered, his boots leaving faint trails of frost melt on the floorboards. "You'll need a coat soon," he said, peeling off his gloves. "Yes," she replied. "Mine is thin. I will make one for the girl first." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I've got some old wool from my father's trunk. Might be enough for two." Sofie drew the thread through her needle. He was a large man, tall, had a voice like thunder when he was riled. She gave a small sound, not quite a laugh. "My father never raised his voice, but when he was disappointed, you felt it in your bones." Hunter tilted his head. "You miss him?" "Every day," she said. "He taught me how to read, how to mend a saddle, how to catch a rabbit without a trap. Not many girls learn that kind of thing where I grew up. I was not raised to be still," she said, "though I've had to learn it." He stepped closer, his voice quieter. "You don't strike me as someone who sits idle by choice." "I used to ride horses bareback through the dunes near the sea," she said, eyes still on her sewing. "Now I measure days with loaves and stitches." He sat down across from her, his hands resting flat on the table. "If the fence holds through winter, I might get a second team. I'd need someone who could ride alongside. Teach the colt to follow trail." Sofie paused. "You would trust me with that. You're not the kind to lie about knowing things," he said. "And I've seen the way you handle the mare. She listens to you. I don't know if I can still ride like I used to. You won't know until you try." Jakob's voice called from outside before she could answer. Sofie stood and crossed to the door, her skirts brushing the floor. The boy held a handful of feathers, eyes wide with worry. "She flew into the barn wall," he said. "One of the hens, I think she's dying." Sofie followed him out, Hunter close behind. The hen lay on the packed dirt, wings drawn tight, beak opening and closing without sound. Sofie knelt beside it, smoothing the feathers gently. "She is too far gone." Jakob's face twisted. "I didn't mean to scare her, I just wanted to see if she'd lay again." "I know," she said. "It's not your fault." Hunter crouched beside them. "We'll bury her under the cottonwood." Jakob nodded, shoulders stiff, and walked back toward the coop. Sofie watched him go. "He tries so hard." "He wants to be useful," Hunter said. "That's a good thing in a boy." She stood slowly. "It's hard to know how to comfort them without saying too much." "You don't have to say much," he said. They listen more to what you do. That evening, she sat on the porch with Johanna sleeping in her lap. The sky had turned a deep indigo, stars just beginning to blink into view. Hunter brought out a blanket and laid it over them both without a word, then sat on the step below her. "I keep thinking about that colt," she said. "He's young, doesn't know yet who he's meant to follow." Hunter looked out across the dark pasture. "Sometimes they pick for themselves, sometimes they just need someone steady." She ran her fingers through Johanna's hair. "I don't know who I am here." "Not yet. You're a woman who kept 2 children alive with no one behind her," he said. "You bake with care, you mend the smallest things before they tear wider. You're building something." She was quiet a moment. "And you? I've been alone long enough to know what it costs," he said. "I'm not looking for noise, just someone who'll stay when the fire burns low." Sofie looked down at him, the lamplight catching the edge of his jaw. "That's not a small thing to ask." "No," he said. "But I'll ask it all the same." The porch creaked beneath them, the wind moving soft through the cottonwoods. She didn't answer right away, but she leaned back, holding the girl a little closer, and didn't look away when he turned his gaze to hers. He didn't press her. He just stayed where he was, close enough to feel the warmth, far enough to wait for her to decide. And she stayed seated long after the stars had settled overhead, her silence no longer edged with fear. By mid-October, the cottonwoods along the river had gone pale and brittle, their leaves snapping loose in the wind and tumbling down like dry paper. The mornings cracked with frost underfoot, and the chimney carried the scent of pine smoke out across the fields. Sofie had added a second quilt to the children's mattress and began tucking warm stones beneath it before they lay down each night. Hunter had spent the last 2 days cutting winter wood, his hands blistered from the axe handle, his shirt damp with sweat in the cold. The shed behind the house stood nearly full now, logs stacked with care, bark curling at their edges like old parchment. Late in the afternoon, after the day's chores were done, he found her sitting on a low stool at the far end of the barn, a length of gray wool draped across her lap. She was bent over it, steady and quiet, needle moving with practiced rhythm. The colt stood nearby, tethered loosely, his eyes flicking between her hands and the swaying barn door. "You've got him trained better than I do," Hunter said, leaning against the post. Sofie didn't look up. "He's not afraid of me, that's a good place to start. He still won't let me near his left side." "You move too fast when you're near his flank," she said, "and you speak like you expect him to obey." Hunter took a slow step closer, watching the colt's ears flick forward. "How should I speak then?" "Like you're asking, not telling." He folded his arms across his chest. "That how your father taught you?" "No," she said. "That's how I taught myself." She tied off the thread and laid the fabric aside. The colt nuzzled her sleeve, and she let him, her hand resting lightly beneath his jaw. Hunter moved to sit on the feed bin across from her. "What was your plan when you first came west?" "There wasn't one," she said. "There was only onward. I got on a train in Chicago and didn't get off until I saw hills." "That why you stopped in Red Rock Ridge?" "Because the ticket ran out," she said, "and I was tired of hearing the wheels." He looked at her, the way the shadows folded over her face in the barn's dim light. "You think you'll ever go farther?" Her eyes were steady. "Farther to where? Some folks talk about California." "I don't need an ocean," she said. "I just needed a place where no one expected me to leave." He was quiet a moment. "Then I'm glad you chose here." "I didn't choose," she said. "But I stayed." Sofie stood then, brushing wool fibers from her skirts. "The children want to make candles. They saw tallow cooling at the neighbor's place and asked if we could try." "I can bring in a deer before week's end," Hunter said. "Plenty of fat on the haunch this time of year. They'll be proud to help. Jakob's been watching how you sharpen the knives. He's got a good eye." Sofie walked toward the barn door. "He needs more than chores. He needs someone to tell him he's doing well. I'll remember that." She paused in the doorway, the last of the light catching the edge of her cheek. "You've been patient with them. They're yours. That makes it simple." Her gaze held his. "You say things like that and then act like they're just facts." Hunter stood slowly, dusting sawdust from his trousers. "Some facts don't need dressing up to be true." She didn't answer, but her expression shifted, less guarded, more certain. That night, before the fire died down, Sofie sat at the table darning one of Jakob's socks. Hunter brought in the last of the chopped kindling, stacking it near the hearth, his shoulders stiff from the work but his face easy. Johanna had fallen asleep beneath the quilt without protest. Jakob, too, had gone quiet early, worn out from hauling water. Sofie didn't look up when she spoke. "Do you believe in luck?" "I used to," Hunter said. "Then I started believing in timing instead. And now I believe in choosing." She set the sock down. "What did you choose?" "Not to keep waiting." He crossed the room then, kneeling to stir the coals and toss in one last split log. The fire caught slow and steady, casting light across the worn floorboards. Sofie rose from the table and moved to the window, her arms folded across her chest. Back in Schleswig, there was a woman who lived alone at the edge of the village, widowed young. She kept bees and left honey on every doorstep, even when no one thanked her. Hunter stayed quiet, not sure yet what she meant to say. "I asked her once if she was lonely," Sofie continued. She said not anymore, said it had taken her years to realize she could stop waiting for someone to give her a place, that she could build one for herself. Sofie turned from the window. "I didn't understand her then, now I do." Hunter stood. "You've built something here, so have you." They stood across the room from each other, space narrowing in a way that had nothing to do with distance. "I don't know what comes next," she said, "but I'm not afraid of staying." He stepped toward her, slow and sure. "I'm not afraid to ask you to." Her eyes held his, no hesitation now. "Then say it plain." "I want you here," he said, "not just for the winter, not just because you make the house feel full, but because I look forward to the sound of your footsteps. Because when you speak, it settles something in me I didn't know was restless." Something in her softened. She took a step closer. "You said the way I talk sounds like home." "It does." She reached out then, not tentative, her fingers brushing his. "This is the first place that feels like one." He lifted her hand to his chest, where his heartbeat was steady and sure. "Then let's build it together." She nodded once, and there was no trembling in it, no fear. The fire crackled low between them. Outside, the wind shifted through the grass, but the house stood warm against it, quiet, steady, and full. The first snow fell soft and early, clinging to the eaves and silencing the prairie. It came with a hush that settled over the land, muting hoofbeats and quieting the stream behind the house. Sofie stood at the hearth, tying a red wool scarf around Johanna's neck, her fingers quick and practiced. Jakob was already wrapped in his patched coat, mittens stiff with use but dry. Hunter waited by the door, pulling on his heavier boots. "If we move fast, we'll reach the neighbors before the wind picks up." Sofie nodded and handed him the small jar of honey they'd boiled down last week, for Mrs. Cartwright. "She helped me with the tallow." Hunter took it without protest and held the door as the children stepped out, their boots crunching into the new snow. The wind had teeth, but the sky was clear, the kind of blue that only shows up after a hard freeze. They walked the mile to the Cartwrights, spread with care, the children staying close. Sofie kept a firm hand on Johanna's shoulder, her other resting lightly against Hunter's coat sleeve. She hadn't meant to touch him, but when she did, he didn't move away. Mrs. Cartwright was waiting at the gate, a kettle steaming on the rail beside her. Come in," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've brought the whole family." Sofie hesitated a beat at that word family, but Hunter just nodded and said, "They've been looking forward to this all week." Inside, the warmth hit them full. The kitchen smelled of molasses and wood smoke, and the long table was already set with beeswax molds and wicks. Jakob and Johanna settled in quickly, eyes wide, hands eager. Sofie helped with the pouring, careful not to spill, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. When Hunter passed behind her to fetch more wick, his hand brushed the small of her back steady, familiar now. She didn't flinch. She didn't step away. Later, while the candles cooled on the sill, Mrs. Cartwright pulled Sofie aside near the stove. "You've settled in well." Sofie folded her hands neatly. "I'm grateful for the land, the quiet." Mrs. Cartwright's eyes softened. "And the man," Sofie glanced toward Hunter, who was crouched beside Johanna, showing her how to trim the first candle's wick. "He gives me space to be who I am." "That's rare," Mrs. Cartwright nodded. It is, don't wait too long to tell him what he is to you. They left near dusk, carrying the candles wrapped in cloth. The wind had risen, brushing frost into the folds of Sophie's skirt. Hunter reached out without a word, took her hand in his. She let him. That night the children fell asleep early, their cheeks pink from wind and pride. Sophie stood by the fire, holding the warmest of the candles in both palms. Hunter was oiling his saddle strap at the table, the lamplight catching the edge of his jaw and the curve of his mouth. I want to stay, she said quietly. He looked up, hands stilling. I'm not waiting anymore, I'm choosing. Hunter rose, slow and sure. He crossed to her, his hands gentle as he took the candle from hers and set it on the mantel. I was hoping you would, he said. She laughed once, soft and real, then let herself lean into him. His arms came around her without hesitation, drawing her in, holding her like something he'd been waiting years to touch without fear of breaking it. I don't need a promise, she said into his shoulder. Just a place to keep building. You've got it, he said, and everything that comes with it. They married the next week, quiet and simple. The preacher came from town and the Cartwright girls brought a basket of eggs as a gift. Jakob wore a coat Hunter had tailored to fit, and Johanna carried a bouquet of dried prairie flowers Sophie had tied with twine. They stood beneath the cottonwood tree, the bark still rough with frost, and spoke their vows with few words but steady voices. Hunter built a second room onto the house that winter, his hands raw with work but his eyes light when he came in each night. Sophie filled it with quilts, with shelves of dried herbs, with books she traded sewing for. Jakob learned how to read by the fire, and Johanna learned how to braid her own hair. Each morning, Sophie rose before the others, lit the stove, and looked out across the stillness. Each night they sat close by the fire, her head leaning against Hunter's shoulder, his thumb running quiet along her wrist. The land stayed hard and honest, but the house no longer echoed. It breathed with warmth, with voices, with the soft sounds of lives being lived fully. Years passed. The colt grew strong and sure under Sophie's hand. Jakob learned to mend harness leather and built his own yoke by the time he was 17. Johanna took to herbs, pressing them between pages, learning what healed and what soothed. Sophie taught her gently, never rushing. Hunter aged with grace, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening, his voice never losing its low steadiness. He still rose early, still rode the fence lines, but always returned before dusk, always kissed Sophie's knuckles before supper. They grew older, but not apart. Every winter, they lit a beeswax candle together on the first snow. Every spring, they planted something new, nothing grand, nothing loud, just two people who had found each other in the quiet and stayed.